do you think somebody should be held accountable for this fiasco between Reyna and Berhalter? Because that's not coming out of nowhere. I think that if those guys, especially because they got calls from Claudio, because Claudio's already mentioned that he confided in Ernie Stewart and Brian McBride about this situation. I heard
which makes sense, because I would expect that. I would expect that, but I would also expect it to end there, to say, thank you for calling, because we respect you. We're former teammates. I understand your son is super talented and promising and you want him to play, but we are not the coaches. We don't make those decisions. We hire coaches, we fire coaches, we maybe have a strategy, overall strategy, but when it comes to managing the team, the coach has it, and that's it. Yeah. And it's done. Sorry, nothing's happening. That's the way the coach sees it, and it's over. And no, there's no pointing fingers. No one's to blame. Claudio can voice his opinion. He can confide in his friends. Great. But that's on a friend to friend kind of relationship. That's it, right? So no one's to blame for what's going down except for Claudio Reyna and his wife, Danielle, and Greg Berhalter, because he's the one who talked about Gio and him being the person who was causing kind of unrest within the squad.
What I would say, Jimmy, is and I spend 90% of my day in a business environment, as you could tell by my outfit. And I will say that there are times that you blur the lines get blurred between a private conversation and a conversation that's like, hey, if you keep going down this route, like I have to take, and I'm not talking about sharing like frustrations with the son not playing. That's like, okay, I get it. You know, like as a parent, I get it as a former player. I get it. You as a parent, I understand that, right? But when we got into the wider scheme of what's being shared and who did what with what information, you start to get into this gray area where it's like almost like the, world of like I don't want to go down that road. Actually, I won't use those examples. But like you're going into this, you're going down this sort of rabbit hole of like the more you say, the more you're pushing me into a period of a person with my job where you're entering into something that's a little bit either inappropriate. I don't know what was said or what the conversation was, but you're entering into a world where you're like, now you're putting my job at risk by sharing information with me or saying things that is now partially my role to either share or pass on this information, right? And I'm not saying I wasn't there for the conversation, so I don't know what it was what exactly was said, but it is the responsibility of anybody receiving that information to stop at a certain point and say, hey, we are friends. I appreciate this information, but some of this stuff, like you either have to be willing to understand that I've got to share this information or I've got to pass this on, because you're now putting me in a really tough spot as a friend and as a peer.
So I guess there's two prongs to this. One, to your point, Heath, and Charlie, I'll come back to you on this. And I definitely want to hear from everybody that's listening, whether you're listening on your favorite podcast platform of choice or here on YouTube. Hit us up at ISWT Pod on Twitter. Give us your 280 character thoughts on this. You can tag it a little bit more if you have more to say. Definitely curious about that. Leave it in the comments right now. We can maybe get to some live ones. But there's two prongs to this. One is, if Brian and Ernie Stewart got this information, do you feel like that they need to report it to the people that are above them, that, hey, there's something brewing here, I think you should be aware of it? Or because, to Heath's point, they're friends, that it just stays with them? And also, hey, Greg's the coach, we're not the coach. It's just going to stop here. I don't need to feel compelled to do that. That's one. The second thing is, do you feel like U.S. Soccer is feeling some pressure to name a fall guy in this situation? Because I wonder if something is going to happen, or if heads are going to roll, or because Brian McBride's contract is up, because he, as Mike Wojtela said correctly, when Brian was hired, his main job was to hire and fire coaches.
But it said it was reported that his contract was through, and then the response was that he's still currently employed. So, like, I don't know if his contract is actually up. Is that confirmed?
I don't know either. I'm just going off of what proper journalists are doing and us commenting on what proper journalists are doing. But there's two prongs there. And I wonder if U.S. Soccer feels like there should be a head that needs to roll, because this is just unacceptable that this happens. And it feels like it comes out of nowhere when there was clearly people that knew. And there was some speculation that maybe Ernie had done that and Brian hadn't, and that was going to give them cause to let him go. That's this the kind of the what was being gossiped about, I would say, at the coaches
Yeah.
convention. I can't confirm any of that, but I just want to say that I'm just curious because there are two different things here. And let's get into what we do know is that those guys did know.
Mm-hmm.
And do you feel like they should report above them, Charlie, when they get this type of information?
I think you have to. Just legally, if you're in a position where I think Ernie Stewart and Brian McBride are working for the Federation, legally, I think they have to report something like that. You can't just say, oh, we're friends, I'm going to take off my U.S. soccer hat. It doesn't work like that. So I think you have to report it, one. And two, the questions that follow are, why now? If you knew this all this time, why would you be reporting it now? I think that comes back to, oh, you're throwing anything you can to make Greg suffer for not playing your son, right? And that's unfortunate that that's what it came down to, because obviously this was a known thing. This was a known thing, and they dealt with it. They rectified it. A lot of things, I think, took place for them to move on, but they did, and they have a beautiful family. They're happy, and then this has to kind of reemerge. So it's unfortunate that now it's in the public light, but that's what happened. And I think I don't necessarily think you could point at Ernie or Brian and say, you're the fall guy for all this. Like, it comes down to Claudio. It comes down to Greg. That's it. No one else.
Well, I will say that I don't think they're looking for a fall guy, Jimmy. I could be wrong, but I don't think they are. I think there will be consequences of, one, what took place, how it was handled, how it was structured. This is a scandal, right? It's like it's a lot of things that are happening that it's going to come down to what was said, when was said, how it was shared, who shared it, who reported it, how it was reported. All of these things are going to have a timeline of events that clarify, was there wrongdoing in the workplace? Was there misreporting? Could this have been avoided? Could this have been, changed? Did you where does the buck stop? And I think that's not necessarily a fall guy as much as there's going to have to be responsibility and accountability placed on this situation. Again, sharing individual information about frustrations of a child between people, friends, peers, whatever, not a problem. But I wasn't there for what was said. I couldn't tell you if Claudio or anybody that was having these conversations crossed the line in what they said, or there was an attack, or there was a threat, or there was any of these things, right? We weren't there for any of that conversation. I'm just saying there's a line there, and if that line was crossed, there's an obligation to share that information. We know a line was eventually crossed by Claudio's wife, but where those lines were crossed in those conversations is where it has to be kind of pushed up. And if that wasn't, then there needs to be some sort of accountability or responsibility taken for those sort of missteps in the process, just like anything, right? Jimmy doesn't track his man into the box. The guy scores. You can't just go
I blame whoever didn't put pressure on the ball.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
what's my fault? There's no pressure on the ball. What
Charlie, if Charlie would just hold the ball up top, we wouldn't lose the ball and have to not play defense.
Yeah, it's all Charlie's fault. I'm going to blame Charlie.
Yeah, I went through that period, so I had to work on that hold up play.
So just to put this to bed for now, and if anything obviously gets revealed as it moves along, we'll obviously talk about it in future podcasts. There was a good comment from Michael who essentially said that they should be looking at all the relationships, including ones that are personal. And if they can get away, if U.S. Soccer, speaking as they can get away from maybe those issues because there's a long history between Brian and Claudio and Ernie and Greg, can we maybe get away from that a little bit? Then, and that those guys in those roles, maybe we wouldn't have had this situation, or maybe it would have been handled in a different way. And I get back, and I'll put this here, JT, just to get back to his original comment, as part of our review of the whole program, we're looking at how we're organized broadly. So we want to make sure that, and we're not just talking about the men's national team coaches, JT's words, it's how we're organized and what we're doing. And I think that in that lens, or through that lens and through that perspective from JT, it feels like the heads could roll just because they're trying to look at everything. And maybe these close relationships between parents and Brian McBride, or, the Reynas and the Berhalters, it's just too close. And there's just too much gray area, to your point, Heath Pierce. So very curious to see how this is going to play out moving forward. This is a scandal, and our first legitimate one, I would say, on the men's side in quite some time.